This is the first video where we are going to discuss the deeds of a specific emperor, and what better way to start than with one of the worst Roman emperors of all time, Flavius Honorius. But why was Honorius such a bad emperor, and what exactly did he do that was so extremely disastrous for the Roman Empire? Well, dear friends of late Roman history, let us find out together. If you would ask someone who was the worst Roman emperor, you would quite likely get answers such as Caligula, Nero, Commodus or Caracalla. And indeed, these were really bad Roman emperors that each in his own way did a lot of damage to the Roman Empire or to the institution of Roman emperor. But there is one Roman emperor especially that deserves extra attention regarding his incapability and sometimes outright stupidity, as it would be his deeds, or more often inaction, that would lead to the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Flavius Honorius was the son of the Emperor Theodosius, who we have mentioned a few times already. It was the same Theodosius who made Christianity the official state religion of the Roman Empire, and who had the old Roman temples closed and the pagan worshippers persecuted and harassed with draconic laws. Under this emperor's watch, many of the great temples of antiquity were destroyed, for example in Alexandria, where Christian fanatics would storm the Serapeum in 391 AD and destroy many beautiful works of antiquity. A regular occurrence, especially in the eastern parts of the empire, and Theodosius not only did nothing against this, but through his anti-pagan laws, even welcomed it. The very same Theodosius then marched against the Western Roman usurper Eugenius and defeated him in 394 at the Battle of the Frigidus River, where in the last video we specially talked about the catastrophic consequences of this battle. And this Theodosius had a son who would prove to be even more disastrous for the empire than him. Flavius Honorius was born in 384 AD and already made co-emperor by his father as a child with 9 years of age in 393. After the Battle of the Frigidus River, he was then installed as the Western Roman Emperor, whereas his also quite young brother Arcadius would rule the East. Theodosius already died in 395, leaving only his 2 sons as child emperors of the Roman Empire. It is understandable that Theodosius wanted to establish a Theodosian family dynasty that would rule over the empire, but having children ruling the most powerful empire in the world of that time might not have been the best idea. Of course, immediately after the death of their father, Honorius and Arcadius split the empire into an eastern and a western half, something which would lead to great problems later on, as these two empires would not always act in the best interest of each other. The splitting of the empire is in fact for me a major contributing factor for its demise. Fortunately for the Western Empire though, Flavius Stilicho, the very able Magister Militum of the West, acted as a mentor for Honorius and was basically the effective ruler of the Western Empire from 395 to his death in 408 AD. Stilicho made use of what was possible in that time and multiple times defended the Western Empire against Germanic invaders with astounding success. He defeated Gothic invaders in Italy under their king Alaric in 402 AD. Then he defeated another Gothic army under Radagaisus in 405 AD. Then also a Vandal army in the same year. And then the Goths another time in 406 AD, thus effectively saving Italy and the city of Rome from complete disaster. This is when we would have seen one of the last Roman triumphs celebrated for a Roman emperor in Rome. In 403 AD, Stilicho and Honorius would enter Rome with great fanfare. The poet Claudius Claudian gave a great panegyric for Stilicho, and a statue in his honor was erected in the Forum of Trajan. Here we could witness the last officially recorded gladiatorial games in the Amphitheatrum Flavium, commonly known as the Colosseum. However, it is thought that they continued unofficially for quite a few more decades, as Valentinian III would have to outlaw them again in 438. Honorius had also the walls of Aurelian heightened by a few meters in 403, which was the last secular building project in Imperial Age Rome. But it would not prove too useful 7 years later. Honorius stayed in the palace of the Caesars on the Palatine Hill for a few months before returning to the safer Ravenna, as if foreseeing the fate of the Eternal City. These were the last glory years of the city of Rome, where we could see it for the last time in a splendorous light, and where the temples and all buildings were still glorious and intact. Only 7 years later, the chain of disasters for the city would already start, as we shall see, due to Honorius's actions that would start its long and slow decay. Meanwhile, Stilicho's forces were stretched thin, and he could not manage to solve all problems of the empire. It was thus that a large band of Germanic tribes managed to cross over the Rhine in late December 406 AD, about which we spoke in the last video. This was already perceived as a stain on Stilicho's otherwise quite flawless career. But now, according to some sources, Stilicho was preparing the Western Roman army for a joint operation with Alaric against the Eastern Roman Empire in order to obtain the eastern part of Illyricum for the Western Roman Empire, because this province was a strong recruiting ground for new troops, and Stilicho was in dire need of new recruits. This was seen by the Senate of Rome as Stilicho wanting to make common deals with Alaric, the enemy of Rome. But Constantine III's rebellion and withdrawal from Britannia, about which we also talked in the last video, made it impossible for Stilicho to follow through with this operation. As a consequence, Alaric revolted and demanded gold, threatening to invade Italy. Stilicho urged the Senate of Rome to give in to these demands, which was also seen in a very disfavorable light. Then there were additional rumors that he had planned to assassinate the Eastern Roman Magister Militum Rufinus. How many of these rumors were true or not, we do not know, but what we do know with a high degree of certainty is that Honorius believed them. And please subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so that you won't miss any future videos on everything related to the late Roman Empire. Why did it fall? How did it fall? And what would you have seen back then as an eyewitness? And you can now even support our work on Patreon or via becoming a YouTube member, so that we can continue for many years making lots of videos on the late Roman Empire. Gratias ago tibi, amici. The minister Olympius had managed to gain the confidence of Honorius, and it is thought that he himself and some other high-ranking members of the imperial palace at Ravenna were planning the overthrow of Stilicho. Stilicho was at Constantinople after the death of Arcadius in order to improve the relations between the Eastern and Western empires and to help the transition to the reign of Theodosius II. It should be briefly noted here that Arcadius was as incapable as his brother, and I quite likely will also make a video bashing him, as it would be unfair to only bash Honorius. So while Stilicho was at Constantinople, Olympius managed to convince Honorius that Stilicho was planning to assassinate Theodosius II and put his own son Eucherius onto the Eastern throne. The weak and insecure Honorius believed these rumors, and upon Stilicho's return to Ravenna had the Magister Militum arrested and put to death on August 22, 408 AD. Thus fell Rome's great protector. We shall examine Stilicho in a separate video. While he indeed was very successful at protecting Italy, it must also be noted that he made two big mistakes. First, not decisively beating Alaric and his Visigoths once and for all, even wanting to wrestle Illyricum away from the east with Alaric's help. and second, not having stopped the invasion of Gaul after 406 AD, or at least tried to defend Gaul, which might still have been possible had he acted fast. But instead, he chose to completely neglect Gaul and prepared his troops for this joint operation with Alaric in order to gain Illyricum for the Western Roman Empire. Had Stilicho not made these decisions, it is very likely that he would not have fallen from grace, and the history of the Western Roman Empire might have looked entirely different. But while we can at least in some part understand the reasoning of Honorius, now would the true stupidity and evil of this emperor shine through. Not only did he have Stilicho killed, but he also had his son Eucherius killed, and all of Stilicho's allies, killing key individuals and ordering the confiscation of the property of anyone who had borne any office while Stilicho was in command. It should be mentioned that all the while Honorius had been married to Temantia, a daughter of Stilicho. She certainly must have been quite unhappy with these events. At least he did not murder her. Others, however, were not as lucky, as Honorius ordered the families of Stilicho's foederati troops to be also massacred. This was a true pogrom against the family members of Stilicho's Germanic foederati troops, especially in Rome, causing them to defect in large numbers to Alaric and his Visigoths. Thus, with this evil and stupid deed, Honorius had made the Visigoths even stronger. Upon hearing that Rome had been bereft of its great protector, Alaric returned to Italy in October 408 AD to claim more gold and land to settle in, as foederati of the empire which Stilicho had promised to him. And there he was now, only 5 years after the triumph in Rome of 403 AD. The Eternal City was now suddenly under siege by Alaric. How much can change in only 5 years? Famine broke out in the city. As the situation worsened, the Senate decided to buy Alaric off with 5,000 pounds of gold and 30,000 pounds of silver. After that, the city would be besieged 2 more times by Alaric, and here we would for the first time see the later common practice of a Roman emperor be proclaimed by Germanic invaders. Priscus Attalus was made counter-emperor to Honorius by Alaric, forcing the Senate of Rome to accept this new emperor, threatening to sack the city if not. Attalus in turn promised to renew Stilicho's treaty, to give the Visigoths land in Italy and make them foederati. Meanwhile, Honorius was sitting idly in his fortified Ravenna, which was much more secured than Rome, being surrounded by marshes to the west and sea to the east. But instead of mounting an army and attacking Alaric, Honorius was inactive in Ravenna, and if he made some decisions, they most often proved to be the wrong ones. A lot of crazy things happened in those 2 years between 408 and 410, but we will need an entire video for that. But what can be said is this: due to Honorius's inaction and wrong decisions, Rome was sacked in August 410 by Alaric and his Visigoths, which would send shockwaves through the empire and dealing a crushing blow to Roman morale. The city had not been sacked in 800 years, and for many contemporaries, it was seen as the end of the world, the end times. Such an apocalyptic character did this event have. Rome would now start its long and brutal decline that would turn it from the most beautiful city in the world into a small habitated core surrounded by a field of ruins in a matter of honly a few hundred years. I talked extensively about the state of Rome in those times in these videos here. As to how Honorius reacted to the sack of Rome, the Eastern Roman historian Procopius of Caesarea has a nice, if somewhat exaggerated story about that event. We can read in Procopius's work The Vandalic War. At that time they say that the Emperor Honorius in Ravenna received the message from one of the eunuchs, evidently a keeper of the poultry, that Rome had perished. And he cried out and said, "And yet it has just eaten from my hands." For he had a very large hen, Rome by name, and the eunuch, comprehending his words, said that it was the city of Rome which had perished at the hands of Alaric. And the emperor, with a sigh of relief, answered quickly, "But I thought that my hen Rome had perished." So great, they say, was the folly with which this emperor was possessed. Even though it is quite likely that this story is made up, or maybe only has a grain of truth to it, it goes to show what the people were thinking of Honorius's folly and his ineptitude as a ruler. But the situation elsewhere was not looking much better. We said earlier that a large number of Germanic tribes had invaded Gallia in 406 AD. They laid waste to many cities in Gallia and moved further south into Hispania after 409. Britannia was given up when Constantine III had withdrawn all Roman troops from there around 408 AD, being left completely to itself and descending quickly into the Dark Ages in the following 100 years. Meanwhile, two other usurpers were rising up against the imperial authority, namely one Gerontius and another called Maximus in Hispania. And it might have already been a lot earlier that the Western Roman Empire could have fallen had Honorius not had the luck of finding a new, very able Magister Militum in the form of Constantius III. Constantius managed to defeat all three usurpers, but of course, instead of fighting against the barbarians, the Romans killed each other by the thousands, greatly weakening the already crippled Roman military, which was done on orders of Honorius. In 414, Constantius attacked Ataulf, the brother of the now dead Alaric, who had proclaimed Priscus Attalus emperor again. Constantius drove Ataulf into Hispania, and Attalus, having again lost Visigothic support, was captured and deposed once again. In the year 417 AD, the year of the 11th consulship of Honorius and the 2nd of Constantius, the emperor entered Rome in the last ever recorded triumph in Rome, with Attalus at the wheels of this chariot. It must have been a sorry sight, this last triumph of a Roman emperor in the city of Rome, 7 years after the city had been brutally sacked. The population already more impoverished, some buildings damaged, and this incapable emperor driving through the humiliated city on a chariot, pretending to be Rome's savior when it was him who had allowed the city to be sacked. Honorius then had Attalus banished to the island of Lipara. Meanwhile, the Franks were advancing in northeastern Gallia and establishing a firm rule there, while a treaty signed in 418 AD granted to the Visigoths southwestern Gallia, the former Gallia Aquitania. It can be thus said that even though Constantius had managed to defeat the Visigoths under Ataulf, he had not managed to drive these Germanic invaders out of the empire again. Too far gone was the Roman army by that time, and the constant civil wars against the usurpers did worsen that situation a lot. In 417 then, Constantius married Honorius' sister Galla Placidia. In 421, Honorius elevated Constantius to the rank of co-emperor. However, when the announcement of his elevation was sent to Constantinople, Theodosius II refused to recognize him. Constantius, enraged, began preparations for a military conflict with the Eastern Empire, but before he could commence it, he died early in 422. Thus Constantius, who might have been a very able emperor of the Western Roman Empire, died too early. In his final years, Honorius reportedly developed a physical attraction to his half-sister Galla Placidia, and in order to escape his unwelcome attentions, Galla Placidia and her children, the future Emperor Valentinian III and his sister Honoria, fled to Constantinople. But Honorius fell sick in 423 and died that year. His rule was unusually long for that time, 28 years, and it was also quite uncommon for an emperor of these times not to die a violent death. Under his long rule, the Roman Empire went from this to this. Britannia was lost, Gallia and Hispania overrun, and quasi-independent Germanic kingdoms had formed on the territory of the Western Roman Empire. Rome had been sacked, and I don't even want to start about his anti-pagan policies. I already extensively talked about them in this video here. It was thus during its most decisive years, from 395 to 423, that an extremely weak and incapable ruler was the emperor of the Western Roman Empire. Had there been a man of the caliber of Aurelian or Maiorianus on the Western throne during these years, the Western Empire quite possibly could have survived this crisis. But instead, the empire got the weak and incapable Honorius, and under his rule it began its unraveling, so that later emperors would have a very hard time undoing the damage that had been done during his reign, so much so that it had become almost impossible at some point to save the Imperium. We had capable commanders like Aetius trying their best, or hero emperors like Maiorianus, but the empire had been damaged so badly in the rule of Honorius that restoring it had become an extremely difficult challenge, and it would have required an extreme degree of luck to achieve it. Luck which the later Magister Militums or emperors that tried to restore the empire simply did not have. Constantius III could have stabilized the Western Empire, but he had died too early in 422. And already 3 years later, Valentinian III, son of Galla Placidia, grandson of Theodosius, would become Western Roman Emperor, again as a child. And he would prove to be as incapable and weak as the sons of Theodosius before him, continuing this weak line of emperors. We will talk about Valentinian III in another video, but his reign was also very long and he made many mistakes, quite on par with those of Honorius. Thus, in the most decisive and important time of the Western Roman Empire, it had very weak rulers in the form of Honorius and Valentinian III. But it was especially during Honorius's reign where the Western Empire started its slow 80-year-long death spiral. It was his deeds, or sometimes lack thereof, the killing of Stilicho, the pogrom against the families of Stilicho's foederati, which made the Visigoths even stronger, the inaction with the sieges and eventual sacking of Rome, and his focus on defeating usurpers instead of defeating the barbarians in Gallia, that would prove to be the death sentence for the Western Roman Empire. Honorius has thus rightly earned the title of one of the worst emperors in the history of the Roman Empire. However, I should also add some redeeming words to Honorius. After all, he was just a child when he became emperor, and not everybody is fit to be an emperor. He was early on influenced by others, and it is quite likely that many of his powerful ministers, such as Olympius, were manipulating him, and he, being not strong of will like an Aurelian or a Maiorian, let himself be governed by others. After all, it was Olympius who was behind Stilicho's assassination plot, and quite possibly also behind the pogroms. It is thus that we can also have pity with Honorius. For maybe he never wanted to be emperor, but was just born into this position in the worst time possible. And who knows how we might have fared had we been born as a child into this extremely difficult position in which he found himself in. I certainly would not want to trade with him. He was really unlucky to be emperor in this worst possible time for the Roman Empire, and he was just not made to be emperor. So maybe instead of being angry, we should feel pity for him. Thank you for watching this video, dear viewers, and a big thanks especially to our dear supporters on Patreon and to our supporters via the YouTube membership. You people are awesome, and the whole Maiorianus team is super thankful for your support. I like to think that Majorian himself would be proud. And if you are not supporting this channel yet via Patreon, please consider to do so, as this will allow us to make better animations and custom drawings for this channel. You can even join now directly on YouTube. Both Patreon and the YouTube membership will give you many benefits, such as exclusive access to our Discord server, and for higher ranks even suggesting topics or participating in exclusive live streams. And this video is best watched in conjunction with the previous video, in which we talked in detail about the crossing of the Rhine in 406 AD, to your right. Or if you want to learn more about how the Roman borders collapsed north of the Alps, you can watch the other video on the right. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history and to all who are like me absolutely obsessed with the late Roman Empire. Gratias amici imperii Romani, and bene vale.